March 6, 1944. Leipzig Airfield, Germany. Before we continue, if you appreciate real World War II stories told with depth, subscribe to WW2 Frontline Legends and let me know where you're watching from. The fog lay thick across the runway, low and heavy, clinging to the broken concrete like a living thing. At precisely 5:41 in the morning, a single Messerschmitt Bf 109 cut through that fog and descended toward the earth on fumes and fading hope. The aircraft shuddered as its wheels touched down. The fuel gauge sat pinned and empty. The engine coughed once, twice, and finally surrendered to silence as the fighter rolled to a stop on an airfield that should have been alive. There were no signal flares, no mechanics sprinting forward, no lines of aircraft warming their engines in the cold dawn. Only wind moved across the field, whispering through twisted metal and broken glass. The sound of the landing echoed far too long, as if the airfield itself were hollow. The German ace climbed from the cockpit slowly. His legs felt heavy. His hands trembled as he removed his gloves. For 7 straight days, he had lived in the sky. 7 days of intercepted bombers, exhausted escorts, burning cities below, and shrinking fuel reserves behind him. He had watched formations rise in the morning and vanish by nightfall. He had watched comrades peel away in flames and never return. He had survived because survival had become instinct. But nothing in his training had prepared him for this. As the fog thinned, the scale of the destruction revealed itself in pieces. First came the outlines on the concrete, long, dark shadows in the shape of aircraft that were no longer there. Then came the hangars. Their doors hung open like broken jaws. Roofs had collapsed inward. Steel ribs jutted toward the sky, twisted and blackened. Then came the wreckage itself. Burned wings scattered across the perimeter. Melted engine blocks embedded in craters. Propellers bent into impossible shapes. 7 days ago, this airfield had housed hundreds of operational aircraft. Now it held none. He moved forward step by step, boots crunching over aluminum fragments and shattered instruments. The smell hit him fully now. Burned fuel, cooked oil, wet ash, the scent of something that had once been powerful and was now nothing more than residue. His eyes tracked instinctively toward the flight line where his squadron used to stand. The places were still marked. The painted numbers remained on the concrete, but the aircraft that once occupied them were gone. At the far end of the runway, something shifted. A lone mechanic crawled out from behind an overturned fuel truck. His movements were slow and uneven. His uniform was scorched and torn. One sleeve hung loose, stiff with dried blood. When the ace called out, the man did not answer at first. He only stared, as if unsure whether what he was seeing was real. Then the mechanic lifted his arm and pointed. Beyond the wrecked perimeter fence, the ground dipped into a vast scar in the earth. A massive burial pit stretched wider than the eye could measure through the mist. Inside it lay the tangled remains of aircraft stacked atop one another in compressed layers of destruction. Crushed cockpits, torn fuselages, piles of engines fused together in melted knots. The shapes were still recognizable. Fighters, bombers, trainers, all reduced to twisted shadows of what they had once been. The number did not come at first. The ace simply stared as his mind tried to accept what his eyes were showing him. When the mechanic finally spoke, his voice sounded distant and hollow. 5,000 planes, gone in 7 days. The words carried no emotion anymore. They had been repeated too many times to still hold shock. They were simply a fact now, a fact too large to argue with, a fact that settled into the ace's chest like cold iron. That night, the airfield remained silent. The ace sat beside his fighter long after darkness fell. Fires still burned far beyond the horizon where factory districts once stood. The sky glowed faintly orange behind thick cloud cover. No searchlights cut upward anymore. No alarm sounded. There was no air defense left to coordinate here. The Luftwaffe had once dominated these skies. Now the darkness belonged entirely to the enemy. Reports arrived in fragments. crumpled papers carried by messengers who looked older than their years. Shouted updates passed between half-collapsed command huts. Regensburg had been smashed. Augsburg followed. Synthetic fuel facilities had been erased. Rail yards used to transport new aircraft were cut into useless steel skeletons. Emergency reserve airfields were found and destroyed before any squadrons could reach them. Training units disappeared before their pilots ever reached combat. The Luftwaffe had not been defeated by enemy fighters alone. It had been dismantled piece by piece at its source. What unsettled the ace most was the timing. The strikes did not come at random. They arrived with terrifying precision. Bombs fell minutes after shift changes. Fuel depots were destroyed hours before scheduled refueling waves. Aircraft were caught packed wing to wing just before dispersal orders could be carried out. Targets were struck not just with force, but with knowledge. Someone had been watching closely. Days later, in the ruins of the regional command building, the ace found the document that changed everything. It had survived only because it had been sealed inside a steel filing cabinet that collapsed beneath falling concrete. The pages were warped and stained, but the ink remained legible. It was a classified movement report. Flight schedules, transfer routes, fuel reserve locations, production output estimates, emergency fallback positions. Everything that the enemy should not have known. Everything the enemy had struck. The raids suddenly made sense. They were not hunting blindly. They had been guided. The realization did not bring relief. It brought something far heavier. If the enemy had been receiving this level of intelligence, then the destruction of the Luftwaffe had not been an accident of war. It had been a calculated erasure. As the ace turned the final page, his eyes stopped. There, among the columns of mission times and coded identifiers, sat his own call sign. It appeared again and again. Every patrol he had flown during those 7 days. Every forward base he had landed at. Every emergency refueling stop. All recorded. All aligned with subsequent Allied strikes. Without knowing it, his movements had traced the very path the enemy followed to destroy Germany's air power. He closed the file slowly. Outside, the wind pushed fresh fog across the dead runway of Leipzig airfield. And the ace began to understand that the 5,000 planes were only the beginning. The reports stayed with him long after midnight. The names, the dates, the coordinates all burned into his mind as he moved through the ruins of Leipzig airfield. The fog returned in waves, drifting low across the ground as if the earth itself were trying to hide what had happened here. The ace walked past the burial pit again, his boots splashing through shallow pools of rainwater collected in bomb craters. The twisted aircraft remains reflected faintly on the black surface, like ghosts trapped beneath glass. He stopped near the edge of the pit and stared down. Fighters, bombers, trainers, transport aircraft, all crushed together in a tangled mass of metal and fire-scarred aluminum. 5,000 machines that once ruled the sky, now reduced to silent wreckage. He tried to imagine the sound they must have made when they were destroyed, the thunder of explosions, the scream of tearing steel, the shock waves rolling across the field. Yet now there was only quiet. He turned back toward the shattered command building and entered through a doorway that no longer had a door. Inside, the walls were stained black from fire. Maps peeled from their frames. Papers lay soaked and stuck together across the floor. He moved slowly, his eyes scanning every surface, searching for meaning inside the chaos. He found more documents. Some were burned beyond recognition. Others remained barely intact. What he read only deepened the horror. The destruction of the Luftwaffe had followed a deliberate order. First the fuel, then the factories, then the transport lines, then the airfields. And only after the infrastructure was broken did the enemy turn fully to the aircraft themselves. The collapse had been engineered step by step. At the moment the full scale of it settled in his chest, the narrator pauses gently. If stories like this matter to you, subscribe to WW2 Frontline Legends and stay with us as we uncover the hidden side of this war. He continued deeper into the ruins. The operations room had once coordinated hundreds of aircraft at a time. Now it stood in silence. The map boards were still mounted on the walls, their colored markers frozen in place. Red for Allied forces, blue for German squadrons, black for lost positions. The black markers now dominated the board. Entire regions had been swallowed. His eyes traced the lines with growing dread. The pattern was unmistakable. The enemy had not guessed where to strike. They had known. The ace knelt beside a fallen desk and pulled open a jammed drawer. Inside, he found additional flight logs. His breath slowed as he scanned the entries. The dates matched his own missions. Each time he landed at a forward strip, that location had been bombed soon afterward. Each time he refueled at a backup depot, that depot vanished within hours. Each time his unit relocated, the previous base was erased. He straightened slowly, the room spinning slightly around him. Somewhere along the way, he had become a moving target. Outside, a cold wind swept across the field. He stepped back into the open air and looked toward the dark horizon. Fires still burned faintly in the distance, where industrial centers once stood. Thick clouds hung low over Germany, heavy with smoke and ash. The sky that once belonged to the Luftwaffe now belonged to the enemy. The realization pressed harder with every passing minute. The collapse was not just military. It was psychological. Pilots arriving at bases found only ruins. Training squadrons vanished before their first deployment. Fuel shortages grounded entire units without a single shot fired. The fear spread faster than any bomber formation. The ace felt it now. Not the fear of death, but the fear of being used. At that moment, as the weight of betrayal tightened around the story, the narrator speaks again. If you are feeling the tension of this moment, subscribe to WW2 Frontline Legends and tell me where you are watching from around the world. Snow began to fall lightly. It drifted through broken hangar frames and settled on scorched concrete. The ace moved slowly back toward his fighter, his thoughts trapped in a spiral he could not escape. Somewhere within the Luftwaffe, a hidden channel of information had been bleeding the war to the enemy. Orders had been compromised before they were even executed. Emergency plans had failed before they began. He climbed onto the wing of his aircraft and sat there, staring into the storm. He thought of the pilots who had trusted the system. The young men who took off believing the sky still belonged to them. The crews who worked around the clock to keep aircraft flying. All of them had been fed into a machine of destruction, guided by knowledge that should never have existed. The wind howled through the wreckage. Metal sheets rattled against their hinges. In the distance, a structure finally gave way and collapsed with a hollow echo. The ace did not flinch. His nerves felt dull now, worn thin by too many truths arriving too fast. He rose and returned to the intelligence office one final time. The classified report lay open on the desk where he had left it. He stared at his call sign again. The code numbers beside it. The timestamps. Each entry marked another step closer to disaster. He did not know whether to feel anger or guilt. Perhaps both belonged to him now. Outside, thunder rolled faintly across the clouds. The war felt closer than ever, yet impossibly distant at the same time. He was standing inside the ruins of an air force that once terrified the world. The narrator speaks again at the final emotional crest of this section. If you believe these forgotten moments of history should never be lost, subscribe to WW2 Frontline Legends and stay with this story until the end. The ace closed the report and placed it carefully back on the desk. He stepped outside once more and faced the empty runway. The fog was lifting now, revealing the full length of the field in bleak clarity. No aircraft, no crews, no movement, only the long, cracked scars of where power once stood. His path through the sky had been traced. His survival had shaped the enemy's precision. The Luftwaffe had not simply fallen. It had been followed into the ground. And somewhere beyond the clouds, whoever had engineered that fall was still watching. The storm clouds rolled deeper over Leipzig airfield as dawn approached again. The ace stood in the center of the ruined runway, feeling the cold wind cut through his flight suit. The destruction around him no longer shocked him. It had become a landscape of truth, a battlefield without bodies, a graveyard built not by combat, but by information. The airfield had been stripped of everything except silence, and now that silence pressed in on him from all sides. The classified report had revealed only fragments. Enough to understand the method, but not the source. Enough to expose the pattern, but not the hand arranging it. Somewhere inside the Luftwaffe's command structure, a hidden channel had guided the enemy's blows. That channel had remained untouched even as bases burned and aircraft vanished. He walked slowly toward what remained of the central communications bunker. Its thick concrete walls had cracked under the force of a direct hit, but parts of the interior remained intact. Wires hung like tangled vines from the ceiling. Shattered radio equipment lay scattered across the floor. He stepped over fallen beams as he moved deeper into the bunker, guided only by dim light filtering through gaps in the concrete above. In the far corner, beneath slabs of broken masonry, he found a metal filing case. It was dented, but untouched by fire. He knelt and dragged it free. The lock had melted, leaving it partially open. Inside were layers of documents stamped with confidential markings. He brushed the dust away and opened the first folder he found. It contained decoded fragments of intercepted transmissions. Some bore Allied signatures. Others bore German encryption that had been broken internally. These were not messages that should have existed in the same place. His pulse quickened. He read the lines carefully. One transmission outlined factory output numbers for a facility that had been destroyed days earlier. Another detailed the movement of aircraft reserves that had been obliterated before they reached their assigned locations. The dates aligned perfectly with the timeline of destruction. The bunker fell silent around him. He lifted another document. It listed the shift schedules of ground crews at several airfields. The times matched precisely when enemy raids had struck. The attacks had come during crew rotations, when defenses were weakest. Again the pattern repeated. The enemy had been guided with knowledge no outsider should possess. He set the papers aside slowly. A realization crept over him like a shadow rising from a floor. This was not espionage from afar. This was direction from someone positioned deep inside the organization. Someone with command access. Someone trusted. He rose from a floor, the weight of the moment settling uncomfortably on his shoulders. His breath hung in the cold air as he stepped back into the main chamber of the bunker. The wind outside moaned softly through the cracks in the wall. The smell of wet dust and burned insulation mixed into a scent that would stay with him for years. He left the bunker and crossed the field toward the ruins of the administrative complex. Snow drifted across the stone pathways. The world felt suspended, caught between a past that no longer existed and a future darkened by uncertainty. Each step seemed to echo louder than the last. He entered the main hallway of the complex, lit only by the faint trace of daylight reflecting through the broken roof. The walls were lined with framed photographs of officers and commanders. Many frames had fallen, their glass shattered. The ones that remained stared back at him with rigid expressions, the faces of men who had once shaped the direction of the air war. He paused at a doorway partially blocked by debris. He shoved the rubble aside and stepped into what had once been the records archive. Cabinets lay toppled. Boxes split open. Papers fluttered lightly in the draft. At the back of the room, one cabinet still stood upright. Its doors were locked. He pried the doors open with a piece of twisted metal. The lock snapped. Inside sat a single large binder. He pulled it free and set it on a table. The cover bore one word in bold letters, restricted. He opened it to the first page. It contained a detailed chart tracking the movements of several key pilots across Germany, including himself. The records were precise, listing altitude, direction, time of arrival, time of departure, fuel consumption, and even radio silence deviations. No ordinary record-keeping was this detailed. Only someone watching very closely would gather information like this. He turned the page and found something more unsettling. The binder included cross-references. Each of his flight paths was matched against Allied bombing times and locations. The alignments were impossible to ignore. Each time he flew near a facility, that facility was struck soon afterward. This was not luck. This was strategy. Someone had used his survival as a tool to dismantle the Luftwaffe from within. His hands tightened around the binder. The destruction had not followed him. It had followed what he represented. In that moment, the narrator offers a quiet pause. If you have stayed with this story until now, subscribe to WW2 Frontline Legends for more hidden history like this, and share where you are watching from. The ace set the binder down slowly. His thoughts churned with possibilities he did not want to consider. Was he intentionally spared by someone inside his own command structure? Was his survival part of a plan he never knew existed? Or had he been manipulated unknowingly, a pawn moved across a board he could not see? He closed the binder and stepped away. The air inside the archive felt thinner now, as if the truth had drawn the oxygen out of the room. He walked back into the hallway and moved toward the far end of the building where high command offices once stood. He entered the first room. Desks lay overturned. Papers covered the floor in chaotic patterns. Nothing seemed organized. Nothing seemed untouched. As he sifted through the rubble, he found another document stamped top priority. It was a memorandum referencing unusual communication coming from a hidden relay station outside Leipzig. The memo warned that certain signals did not match known German frequencies. It urged commanders to investigate. The warning was dated 10 days before the collapse began. No action had been taken. He held the memo tightly as the wind rattled loose window frames. The implications were severe. Someone inside the Luftwaffe had known their communications were compromised and had done nothing. Whether from fear, negligence, or intention, the result had been the same. The collapse had continued unchecked. He left the office and stepped outside again. The snow had turned to sleet. Thin sheets of ice formed across the tarmac. His boots slipped slightly as he approached the runway once more. The airfield looked smaller now, as if the destruction had consumed part of its size. The vast emptiness that stretched across the horizon seemed to close inward. He walked along the edge of the runway, following the faint tire marks left by his own landing. They curved gently, then straightened as they approached the point where the aircraft came to rest. He followed them with a deliberate pace. His mind replayed the events of the past week. The dogfights, the firestorms, the crumbling defenses, the desperate landings, the moments where he believed death had come for him, only for fate to turn him another direction. At the time, he had thought himself lucky. Now he questioned whether luck had anything to do with it. He stopped near the burned remnants of a signal tower. The structure leaned unnaturally, as though held up by static memories. The communications array at the top had melted into twisted metal. The ground beneath it bore the scorch marks of a heavy blast. He knelt and scraped away ice from a partially buried metal object. It appeared to be a broken antenna housing. As he lifted it, he noticed a series of numbers etched along the interior frame. He recognized the code. It did not belong to German manufacturing. It belonged to equipment used by Allied intelligence. The antenna had been replaced before the collapse. Someone had installed a listening device inside a Luftwaffe tower. His heart pounded. His breath caught in his throat. The evidence was undeniable. Parts of the airfield had been compromised long before it fell. He stood slowly, gripping the metal frame tightly in his hand. Snowflakes clung to his flight suit. The world felt unbearably still. He turned toward the open expanse of the airfield. The fog was lifting again, revealing the long runway in full measure. The silence that once felt oppressive now felt purposeful, as if the land itself waited for him to understand the final piece of the puzzle. He looked down at the classified report, then at the binder, then at the antenna. 3 pieces of a truth that had remained hidden behind the collapse of 5,000 aircraft. The enemy had not followed him out of coincidence. They had followed him because someone within the Luftwaffe had given them every reason to. He stepped forward again, the cold wind rising around him. The story of those 7 days had not ended with destruction. It had ended with revelation, a revelation that would haunt the remaining months of the war. The airfield stretched out before him like a scar across the land, a reminder of power lost, a testament to the cost of betrayal, a warning that even the strongest force could fall when struck from within. He lifted his gaze toward the distant clouds rolling in from the west. The storm was returning, swallowing the horizon in shades of gray. He stood alone on the ruined runway, a witness to the final unraveling of the air force he had served, shaped by a truth he was never meant to discover. And as the first rumble of thunder echoed across the empty landscape, he understood that the collapse of the Luftwaffe had never been a matter of strength. It had been a matter of knowledge,